The Unexpected Outcome, Part 2, The Keeping. Kael made a decision. Taking Lumen was the only choice. A decision needed and made so fast that he forgot that powers beyond our thoughts existed in the woods. He took Lumen with a loom of regret. The child's small eyes followed him with an old patience. It had no understanding of the ledger's weight. In the morning, the village watched with a mixture of hope and suspicion as Kael walked toward the Greywood. The magistrate, seeing power sleeping, dispatched 2 men to stop him. Merin, who had been both arrogant and frightened, volunteered to accompany Kael because his courage was made of a terrible need to wash his complicity clean. The path into the wood was less imposing now that he knew what waited. Yet each step was an admission, a return of spoils, a confession. The trees watched silently with the age of their rings and the patience of things who have seen men forget. Kael heard the creek's voice like a throat clearing, and the same small bell sounded somewhere deeper, like hands turning pages. He tightened his grip around Lumen's small shoulders and breathed out all the names he had learned to love and found half missing. They reached the pool in a silence like a held breath. The keeper stood where he had stood before, as if the forest had appointed him a sentry to judge. He watched them, and his eyes, sharp, wood-made, held the ledger of the forest in a patient way. "You brought it back," he said. "Good, but the pool does not take without a reckoning." Kael's fingers trembled. He set Lumen down at the fringe of the water. The pool lay like a black mirror. The surface was as smooth as a held breath. Lumen sat cross-legged and dipped a finger into the water. The ripples moved outward and the reflection shattered. The little creature looked up at Kael, and for a moment, just a second, its eyes were as clear as any child's. There was a softness then that made Kael's chest ache. "I don't want to take anything more," Kael said. He could hardly hear himself, as if he were somebody else. He had rehearsed words of humility in the night. "Take me instead." The keeper's mouth made a motion. Was it surprise or sorrow? He turned his head toward the wood, as if listening to a chord the rest of them could not hear. "The pool chooses," he said. "It asks, and it has always asked. You cannot give everything you were not warned to save." Lumen began to hum, and the pool answered, and the sound of their duet was a low thing like tree trunks rubbing in a windless hour. The air smelled of old rain. The water rose as if summoned, drawing a light from its depths that was not the color of the sun. It faced them like a throat opening. The creature in Kael's arms, his prize, his curse, turned its face toward him and then bowed its head. The ripples drew up and a thread of water braided itself into the air. The voice that spoke was Lumen's, but stretched and older, as if the memoir of a whole wood spoke through a small mouth. "It asks for names. The cost is the keeping." Kael's breath ceased. He remembered Lysa's fingers and the thread placed on his shirt. He remembered the village's faces softening and then cleaving. He saw Tilda's bed empty, and he thought of the baker's burnt loaf. He had sought fame, and it had come with teeth. He had been offered a way out, the old sharp way, to hand back a part of himself in return for everything else. He reached out without thinking. He had always measured himself in deeds. "Take me," he said. "Take my name. Take my place." The ripples shivered, and the pool made a sound like a page being turned. Lumen looked at him as if reading an address on a tomb. The keeper bowed his head as if in relief or in sympathy. Even the trees seemed to lean in. "Names have shape here," the keeper said softly. "Sometimes a man can step out of himself and give his name a new home, but," he fixed Kael with a look that was not unkind, "it will not be simple. Names do not die when they are given, they live in other forms." The little figure raised its head and touched Kael's brow as if blessing or branding. Kael felt something loosen, a warmth that poured out like a river. He felt his family's portrait slide away. He felt his father's face smooth and flatten, like something washed by tides. He felt his own name leave him, like a bird startled from a hedge. He fell to his knees then, and the world tilted. The sky above the pool swam with a light that was not dawn or dusk. Lumen hummed, and the ripples swallowed names and laid them like stones. When the sound died down, Kael sat back on his heels and gasped, certain he had done the right thing. He turned to stand and could not find his name on the edge of his lips. The silence was not empty. It was a field someone had cleared. He felt cleansed in a way that was both paradise and injury. He had given the thing the pool asked for. Then the keeper spoke as if reading a final ledger entry. You are not unmade, neither are you the same. Go home, watch, live with the consequence. Kael walked away from the pool with Merrin at his side and the keeper watching until the trees swallowed him and the light. He felt lighter and more fragile. He had meant to save the village. He had paid. He had pledged what he thought was a small thing to avert ruin. What he did not yet know, and what would be the true test of his bargain, was that names once given to things that are not human do not just vanish. They become roofs and lungs and talismans for new appetites. He would learn in time that giving up his name did not end the hunger. It redirected it. It made him capable of things he had not asked for, and it made the village see him as a man both small and large at once. On the path home, a child called to them from a doorway. Are you Kael? She asked, because sometimes people try to anchor others in the past. Kael looked at her and then past her and answered with a shrug, I am who I am, because his tongue could still form words even without the thread of his old designation. Merrin laughed nervously. The child's mother frowned and then led her inside like a hand settling a coin down on a table. At Highbridge, some people welcomed him with relief, others with suspicion. The magistrate, ever the ledger's clerk, took Kael's return with a small, complicated smile. You did what you thought right, he said, but his hands were not empty of plans. He wrote fewer lines that night, and his gaze on Kael was different, as if he had been measuring the shape of a man whose name no longer sat neatly in the margin. Kael tried to sleep. The village's noises held his attention like a new kind of seam. He dreamt not of the pool, but of small things. Tilda's hands, Merrin's smile, a baker's oven. In the morning, he rose and walked the lanes to watch if the world he had bargained for would hold. There were small signs of mending. Tilda saw her daughter sometimes in shadows he could not account for, and sometimes not at all. Bread rose unevenly again, colors returned to the weaver's cloth, though not to their former sharpness. People's mouths formed the names of their dead with different edges. Kael watched and waited, and tried to read the ledger of the village like the keeper read the pool, softly with a hand ready to mend. But the world is a thing that wastes its gentle gestures quickly. A new hush moved through the town, like a breath held too long. Children who had touched Lumen dreamt of birds with teeth. The magistrate's ledger bulged with an account that could not be balanced in coin alone. Men who once mocked Kael for his ambition now came to him with eyes like miners and asked what they could do to keep their names. One night, 3 weeks after he had returned the child to the pool, a boy from the far edge of the village arrived in a tumble of breath and fear. He said a name that belonged to Kael's childhood, an old, honest syllable that the village had whispered over mead. Somebody took it, he said, and his voice skittered like a stone. The magistrate's men left for dawn with the promise of protection. Kael, left with the hollow after that rushed departure, felt the first real tremor within himself. He could no longer call his own name, but he could be blamed and loved and feared in ways that were new. He had given a name up to buy the peace of a village and had found peace to be a relative thing. Lumen had taken his name, and in that taking had opened doors. He sat by the tree where the great oak's letters were carved and ran his fingers down the grooves. The place where his own line had been written felt like a blank page. He could not read himself. He did not know whether that absence was a wound or an answer. Behind him, the Greywood breathed. The pool had not finished keeping its ledger, and somewhere inside the wood, the keeper watched the hinge of the world turn.
When the first frost came after Kael's bargain, it arrived like an accusation. The hedgerows rhymed with ice, the river breathed white, and the village stitched itself tighter against the cold. The magistrate wrote new rules into his ledger and posted them in the square, rules that were meant to keep order but mostly kept people busy handling their fear. Kael walked the lanes with the lightness of one who had given something away and the weight of one who had not quite understood what he had traded. He had thought surrendering his name would be a kind of absolution. Instead, it was the beginning of an apprenticeship he had not applied for. The absence of his given name was not emptiness, it was an aching cavity with the possibility of being filled. People stopped calling him Kael and instead found ways to name him by whatever he did. Some called him the man who went to the Greywood. Others, with a tenderness that hurt, called him the one who saved us. The magistrate, who kept track of names as if they were receipts, began to write fewer lines about him and more notes in the margin, small flourishes that looked like questions. Kael heard these new titles as if from a balcony, public yet somehow not his. The theft of names did not stop with the first return. If anything, the wood's appetite sharpened when it saw how a village could stumble into its gifts. For every small miracle,
The magistrate saw in this a new business. "We shall charge for storytelling lessons," he said, and a laugh that did not reach his eyes followed. But others, the mothers, the bakers, the men who made boats, found in the child's telling a sober, humbling ceremony. People lined up to tell names aloud in the square. They pressed names into each other's palms until their faces went red from the exertion of remembering. Kael watched these rituals with an odd mix of relief and grief. There was comfort in a village learning that there were ways to hold a name, but every litany they sang showed him the depth of what he had given away. He could encourage and instruct, showing how to string a name into a song so that the wood might accept it willingly. But when a child asked him his name, plainly as a child will, he could not answer. He found he had grown skilled at not being named, an art in itself. He would tell stories instead, and people would gather and call him the one who listens or the teller from the Greywood. Those names were skirts that fit him only partly. Time shapes people as much as names do. As months widened into years, Kael's bargain began to show both its threadbare and generous seams. The village adapted. It learned to tuck names away in places where the wood could not reach, or to present them publicly in the right tone so that the pool would accept them and return only a small, bearable tax of memory. Tilda's mirror returned sometimes, and sometimes did not. When she came, she smelled always of river mud and spoke of children with voices of fish. She never stayed long. Merrin, who had once been a heedless boy, took to guarding lists of names and reciting them at dusk. He became, in his way, a small anchor around which the village rotated. Yet the undercurrent never stopped. New, stranger turns happened that no one could have predicted. People who had eagerly given names in rituals found them lodged in odd places. The magistrate developed an unusual habit of humming a tune that was no tune at all. A wealthy merchant found that whenever he wrote a trade, he could not recall the face of his eldest son. It was as if the poor, having learned the art of exchange, grew more inventive about the terms it chose. And then, one spring, not long after the hawthorn bloomed, Lumen came to Kael in a way that changed their arrangement. Lumen, who had been returned to the pool, sent a sound through the village that was not quite a call, but which the keeper translated as an invitation. There would be a reckoning, it said. The pool wanted not names now, but something rarer, companionship. Kael felt the shiver of an old bargain surge up his spine. He had thought the worst of his price had been paid. Lumen's wish for companionship was not merely a desire for physical company. It wanted a presence that could translate,
carry and tend the commerce of names without letting it run amok. The pool wanted someone who would stand at the threshold and direct what passed, someone who would be neither merely human nor merely stone. The keeper, who was always both sympathetic and pragmatic, spoke plainly. "You gave your name," he said, "and so you are more eligible than others to perform such work. You have less to lose because you already lost much." Kael, who had spent the last seasons building small bridges between people and their words, understood then that the want at the pool's heart was a deeper hunger for order. Lumen did not desire only names, it wanted a steward for the ledger it kept. It desired a living catalogue, a place where names could be chosen, negotiated, and sometimes mercifully forgotten. The pool needed someone who could listen to a village and hold a forest in one skin. He could refuse. The magistrate had his expectations, the villagers had their fears, and the keeper had a quiet that suggested he would not begrudge a man who chose differently. Kael thought of Lisa's black thread, and of all the times he had misunderstood what his courage might cost other people. He thought of Tilda's arms empty in the night, and of the faces that now held names they had been given back at great cost. He walked to the pool in the hour when the light was between sleep and waking. Merrin came with him, scarred by having sat too long in the market's hush. The keeper stood at the margin, his hands folded, like a man who prays by his own tree. When they reached the pool, Lumen arose from the water in a sound like a chorus of small bells. The creature's form had changed since the first time Kael saw it. It was longer, as if it had been stretched by tides, and the black in its eyes was deeper, yet friendlier. Water fell from its hair in little threads that refracted the sky into something that looked like memory. "You offered before," Lumen said, and the voice was like leaves falling through a long stare. "Now I ask for what the pool needs, a steward." Kael felt the ledger of the world settle on him like dew. He remembered all the things he had wanted: fame, recognition, a young man's hunger. He had once thought himself ready to steal a story and wear it. Now he knew fame could not be captured in one triumph. It was a habit, a set of responsibilities, or else a disease. "What is the cost?" he asked. Lumen's small hands curled and opened. "Names," it answered. "Not yours, but names you will hold. You will be a place. People will come and hand you your names to guard or trade. You will not keep them forever. You will learn to give them away, to stitch them into the world where needed. You will be more than a man and less than the pool. You will sleep by water and by hearth." It was a bargain like the ones men offer when they mean to change something beyond themselves. It asked not for flesh, but for function. It required Kael to become a living hinge. He agreed, not in a theatrical way. There were no flames, no chorus. There was only the quiet sliding of his own acceptance. The pool drew him nearer. Lumen touched his forehead, and a pain like 100 small seams opened and closed. Kael felt threads running into the deep places behind his eyes, pulling names out of the air, dripping them over his shoulders like shawls he had not thought to wear. The world rearranged as if someone had reindexed the books in a library. When the touch was done, Kael arose and realized something had been altered at his center. He could not say his name because he could not keep it to himself. It existed now as a thing he could hand to others. Yet he also felt a new competency, the ability to hear the tension of a name and know where it should be held. It was a trade-off with a kind of holiness about it, a private erasure for communal capacity. Merrin watched him with the face of someone who had seen a man pass through a doorway and emerge different. The keeper bowed his head in approval. Lumen hummed and slid back into the pool with the air of a guest returning to its place at the table. Back in Highbridge, people noticed a change in Kael, if they noticed at all. He sat in the square at dusk with a small bowl at his feet. People came with scrap paper and wood tags, with names they feared would blow away in the night. They came to him with stories of lost sons, with the names of their mothers whispered into his hands like offerings. They asked him to keep them safe. He would listen with a skill he had not had before, a listening that could pluck the right place for a name in the weave of the world. He would sometimes place a name gently on a hawthorn root, sometimes hand a name to the river, and sometimes bury it in the soft earth where a child might later find it and shape it into a song. He taught others how to hold their names, and in doing so, he became an institution. The magistrate, who always imagined names as entries, came to see him and after a long time nodded. "You are doing the job the ledger could not," he said. He wrote no statement, no formal decree. For a man who saw everything as balance sheets, Kael's new work was a stubborn anomaly. Not everyone was converted. There were those who feared that by giving Kael their names, they were entrusting it to a thing that was not fully human. Rumors trumped rituals. A handful of zealous men argued that the wood must be destroyed, and Kael was its emissary. They tried to drive him away one night with torches and sticks, calling him traitor and witch and worse. He stood in the square with his breath clouding in the air and his hands empty. He did not retaliate. His power was not in arms, but in patience. People called him monstrous and savior in the same stretch of breath. In time, the extremity of those attempts burned out. People found simple methods that eased their panic. Keep your names clean, sing them out loud, tie them into cloth. They practiced the rituals with Lisa's black thread and with Merin's lists. They learned that names, when carefully made, were not easily stolen. The wood, as if respecting the new order, took fewer names by force and instead accepted those offered up in ceremony. The pool, in turn, yielded less unpredictable bounty. Lumen lived again in the clear water and sometimes came up to the surface like a childlike curiosity. It watched Kael with what one might call a friendship. Years went by. Kael's hair silvered at the temples. Children who had once